Hey guys, welcome back to Royalty Now, where I bring famous figures from the past into the modern day using Photoshop, and hopefully teach you a little bit about history along the way as well. Today's subject is Elizabeth Woodville, England's famous White Queen. Elizabeth was Queen of England as the wife of King Edward IV from 1464 until his death in 1483. Surprisingly, there's no contemporary image of her that exists, and this well-known portrait that I'm working from is likely a multi-generational copy of a lost original, which unfortunately we see a lot with portraits of the women in history. There are several versions of this portrait, and they all are kind of they look either like copies of each other or copies of the original, and they all share these same features of the strong nose and kind of dainty chin with this large open forehead. So the artistry on this original was a little bit crude, which is why it's a little hard to imagine her likeness, particularly around the cartoonish nose that I had to adapt a little bit. And Elizabeth was said to be the most beautiful woman in the island of Britain. And my favorite description of her says she had heavily lidded eyes like those of a dragon. She was definitely a charming woman and a very beautiful one too. Even her enemies agreed on her beauty. She almost definitely had a plucked or shaved hairline in this portrait to open her face because that was the fashion of the time. So I've taken her hairline down just a little. I've still given her a high forehead, but taken it back just to look more modern. Elizabeth had such an interesting life as one of the main power players during the War of the Roses, and this was a bitter battle for the throne of England that lasted over 30 years. She was born into kind of an upper middle class family of landed gentry, but she really rose to prominence when she married the king. And this was a huge scandal at the time because the king was actually set to marry a French princess, which would have solidified their alliance with France. But instead he married Elizabeth, whose family was not considered to be politically prominent. They had ties with the crown, and of course they had lands and a family home, but it was almost peasantry considered at that time in history. There's such a romantic story behind Elizabeth meeting Edward, and I wanted to recount that for you here. And just keep in mind about how stunning Elizabeth was said to be at this time. So Elizabeth was widowed when her husband died in battle. Her husband was actually fighting on the opposite side of Edward, her future husband's battle, which was an interesting kind of twist of history. And she had two young sons that now had no inheritance because her husband had died. And Elizabeth learned that Edward IV would be hunting near her family home one day. So essentially she planned to find him and charm him with her incredible beauty to get her son's inheritances. She allegedly met him under a big oak tree on their family property, and he was so taken with her that he asked her to be his mistress right away, which she refused, a tactic that seems to work oddly well on these English kings, just ask Anne Boleyn. So instead of let her go, they married secretly. And she was called the White Queen during her reign because she was on the York side, which was represented iconically by a white rose, as opposed to the Lancastrian side, who are represented by a red rose. Her life was really fascinating and bears further research if you are interested in this time in English history. So here is what I came up with for my modern recreation of Elizabeth Woodville, the famous White Queen. If you're interested in a print or bookmark of any of my recreations, I have so many on the Etsy store, and that is etsy.com/shop/royaltynow. And as always, comment down below with more subjects you'd like to see. Thank you so much for watching.